The sound of my keycard sliding into the electronic lock of Unit 47D at Harborview Towers was the moment everything I thought I knew shattered into 1,000 pieces. I wasn't supposed to be there. My husband Daniel thought I was 300 miles away in Millbrook visiting my sister Rachel for the long weekend. But here I was, standing in front of a luxury penthouse apartment I'd never seen before, about to uncover a life he'd been hiding from me for who knows how long. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. My name is Jennifer Caldwell, and 6 months ago, I genuinely believed I had everything figured out. Daniel and I had been together for 11 years, married for 8 of those, living in our beautiful craftsman-style home in Cedarbrook with our 7-year-old daughter, Lily, who had just finished 2nd grade at Riverside Elementary. Daniel worked as a senior financial advisor at Pinnacle Wealth Management, and I owned a successful boutique marketing agency called Cascade Communications that I'd built from the ground up into a thriving business with 12 employees and clients across 5 states. We were the couple everyone pointed to as relationship goals. The parents at Lily's school who seemed to have mastered the impossible balance between demanding careers and present parenting. Our house on Maplewood Court was the kind of place that made people slow down as they drove past. I'd spent years transforming it from a dated 1920s bungalow into something that belonged in Architectural Digest. Original hardwood floors restored to their former glory, vintage light fixtures I'd hunted down at estate sales, and a kitchen renovation that had taken 8 months but resulted in a space with marble countertops and custom cabinetry that made cooking feel like art. The backyard was my pride and joy. I designed every inch of it myself, from the raised garden beds where Lily and I grew tomatoes and herbs each summer to the pergola covered in wisteria that provided shade for our outdoor dining table. There was a small koi pond Daniel had surprised me with on our 5th anniversary, complete with a hand-carved stone fountain he'd commissioned from a local artist. Lily's treehouse sat in the corner, built by Daniel over 3 weekends 2 summers ago, complete with a rope ladder and a small balcony where she'd spend hours reading her chapter books. Every room in our home told a story. The living room featured photographs from our trip to New Zealand, where Daniel had taken me for our 10-year dating anniversary, surprising me with a helicopter ride over Milford Sound. The dining room displayed the handcrafted pottery we'd collected during weekend drives to small coastal towns, each piece carefully chosen from local artisans who poured their hearts into their work. Lily's bedroom was a carefully curated space that balanced whimsy with function, built-in bookshelves overflowing with her growing library, an art station where she could paint and draw, and educational toys mixed with just enough stuffed animals to let her be a kid. Our social calendar reinforced the image of domestic perfection. We hosted dinner parties where Daniel would smoke salmon on our custom-built outdoor grill while I prepared elaborate side dishes that looked effortless but required hours of preparation. Our friends would marvel at how we managed to keep our house so pristine while juggling 2 demanding careers and raising a bright, well-adjusted daughter. At Lily's school functions, we were the couple other parents approached for advice. How did we maintain such a strong partnership while building successful careers? What was our secret to keeping the romance alive after so many years together? We'd smile modestly and deflect, attributing our success to mutual respect and strong communication, never admitting that lately our conversations had become increasingly transactional. Daniel's career had been on an impressive upward trajectory. He'd started at Pinnacle Wealth Management fresh out of business school as a junior analyst and had climbed steadily to senior financial advisor through what everyone praised as his exceptional ability to understand complex investment strategies and his talent for building trust with high-net-worth clients. His portfolio included several millionaire families, tech executives, and even a retired NBA player who'd relocated to our city. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. Alright, let's get back to it. My agency had grown faster than I'd ever imagined possible. What began as freelance marketing consultation for local businesses had evolved into a full-service agency handling everything from brand strategy to digital campaigns for mid-sized companies. We'd recently landed a contract with a regional healthcare network that would keep my team busy for the next 18 months and significantly boost our annual revenue. From every external perspective, we looked like we'd achieved the American dream. 2 thriving careers, a gorgeous home, an adorable daughter, and a marriage that seemed to weather every challenge with grace and partnership. We'd been featured in the local business magazine as an example of entrepreneurial success, photographed in our living room with Lily between us, all three of us wearing genuine smiles. But perfect marriages, like perfect houses, require constant maintenance. And I was beginning to realize that I'd been doing most of that maintenance entirely alone. Daniel had always been charismatic, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately make everyone feel important. But lately, that charm felt performative, as if he were managing our relationship like one of his client portfolios rather than actually being present in it. Our conversations had shifted from intimate exchanges to logistical coordination. Who was taking Lily to soccer practice? Which bills needed attention this week? Should we finally replace the furnace this fall, or could we stretch it through one more winter? The easy affection we'd once shared had been replaced by efficient teamwork. We still functioned beautifully as co-parents and household managers, still presented a unified front to the world, but something essential had been quietly slipping away without either of us directly acknowledging it. I told myself this was normal, that all marriages evolve through different phases, that the intensity of raising a young child while building careers naturally changed the dynamic between spouses. Our friends with children confirmed this, joking about how date nights became quarterly events instead of weekly rituals, how deep conversations got replaced by discussions about school supplies and dentist appointments. But looking back now, I realize I was working overtime to preserve the illusion of our perfect marriage, making excuses for Daniel's increasing emotional distance, convincing myself that his late nights at the office and weekend client calls were simply the price of his professional success. I'd been so focused on maintaining the image of our ideal family that I'd stopped noticing when Daniel began treating our shared life like another item on his professional to-do list, something to be managed efficiently rather than cherished deeply. The truth was, our perfect family existed beautifully in photographs and social media posts, looked flawless to neighbors and friends, but had become increasingly hollow at its foundation. Daniel and I had transformed from passionate partners into efficient business associates running a successful domestic operation. And I'd been too busy polishing the surface to notice that underneath, the entire structure was beginning to crumble. What I was about to discover would prove that some facades, no matter how carefully maintained, eventually crack under the weight of the lies holding them together. The first crack in my carefully maintained world appeared on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, and it came from the most mundane source imaginable, a misfiled bank statement. I was in Daniel's home office looking for our property tax documents that our accountant needed for an upcoming filing deadline. Daniel had texted me earlier that morning saying they were in the third drawer of his filing cabinet, the one he kept locked, but had given me the combination 2 years ago for exactly these kinds of situations. He was in back-to-back client meetings all day at Pinnacle Wealth Management and wouldn't be home until after dinner. The filing cabinet was impeccably organized, which didn't surprise me. Daniel had always been methodical about record-keeping, a trait that served him well in his career managing other people's wealth. Tax documents were labeled chronologically in hanging folders, insurance policies had their own section, and household receipts were sorted by category and year. But wedged behind the property tax folder from last year was an envelope I'd never seen before. Not our usual bank, we'd been with Clearwater National Bank since before we got married, but something called Westmont Private Banking. The envelope was addressed to Daniel at our Maplewood Court address, but I'd never seen it come through our mail. Which meant he'd been intercepting it before I could see it. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened the envelope. The statement inside was for an account I knew nothing about. Account holder, Daniel Caldwell. Current balance, $347,892.16. $347,000. I sat down in Daniel's leather desk chair, staring at the numbers that seemed to swim on the page. This wasn't possible. Our joint checking and savings accounts at Clearwater had maybe $30,000 combined. We'd been saving for a kitchen upgrade and building Lily's college fund slowly but steadily. Daniel made good money as a senior financial advisor, probably around $180,000 annually with commissions, and my agency brought in roughly $150,000 after expenses. We lived comfortably but not extravagantly. Where had nearly $350,000 come from? I looked at the transaction history with growing confusion and dread. Regular deposits every 2 weeks ranging from $3,000 to $8,000. Withdrawals for rent, to something called Harborview Property Management. Charges at restaurants I'd never been to. Purchases from furniture stores during times when we'd supposedly been buying nothing. A monthly payment to something called Summit Storage Solutions. But what made my blood turn cold was a transfer labeled quarterly dividend distribution from an investment account at Sterling Capital Group. The amount, $42,000. That single quarterly payment was more than I made in several months of running my agency. Daniel had investments I knew nothing about. Investments large enough to generate $42,000 every 3 months. That meant the principal investment had to be substantial, probably well over $1 million. My husband, who claimed we needed to budget carefully for Lily's braces next year, who suggested we postpone our planned trip to visit my sister because flights were expensive, who'd asked me to cut back on my own business expenses because things were tight, that man had been sitting on a fortune I knew nothing about. I photographed every page of the statement with my phone, my hands trembling so badly I had to retake several shots. Then I carefully returned everything to exactly how I'd found it, closed the filing cabinet, and walked out of his office on legs that felt disconnected from my body. The second crack appeared just 3 days later, and this time I was actively looking for it. I'd started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. Daniel's schedule, his phone habits, the way he explained his days when he came home. On Friday evening, he mentioned casually that he'd be playing golf on Saturday morning with a client named Richard Thornton, a tech entrepreneur he'd been courting for months. Might be a long round, he said while scrolling through his phone at the dinner table, not quite meeting my eyes. Richard likes to take his time, talk business between holes. Probably won't be back until early afternoon. I nodded and smiled like I always did, then excused myself to help Lily with her homework. But later that night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, I carefully took his phone from his nightstand and brought it into the bathroom. I knew his passcode. We'd always had an open phone policy in our marriage, or so I'd thought. There was no golf appointment on his calendar for Saturday. Nothing at all scheduled between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. But there was an appointment on Sunday that made my stomach drop. HD 2 o'clock, review quarterly statements. HD, Harborview District. The same Harborview from the property management company on his secret bank statement. I went through his text messages with shaking hands, but found nothing suspicious. His email looked normal: client communications, industry newsletters, fantasy football trash talk with his college friends. But then I noticed something odd. His email app showed he had 2 accounts logged in, his work email at Pinnacle Wealth Management and his personal Gmail account we'd set up years ago. But in his settings, there was a third email account I'd never seen before, d.caldwell.consulting@privacymail.com. I clicked on it and watched as months of correspondence loaded. Messages about property viewings, furniture deliveries, utility account setups, and investment portfolio reviews. Real estate agents discussing your new space in Harborview District. Interior designers sending mood boards for the penthouse project. Financial advisors at Sterling Capital Group addressing him as a valued private client. One email from 2 months ago made me physically sick. Daniel, confirming your request to increase the monthly auto transfer from Sterling to Westmont Private Banking to $15,000. This will give you more liquidity for ongoing expenses related to your secondary residence while keeping the principal investment portfolio intact for long-term growth. As discussed, this structure maintains complete separation from your primary household accounts. Gerald Martinez, Senior Wealth Manager, Sterling Capital Group. Secondary residence. Complete separation from primary household accounts. Daniel hadn't just hidden money from me. He'd created an entirely separate financial life, with its own bank accounts, its own email address, its own residence, its own team of professionals helping him maintain the deception. The third and final crack came the following Tuesday, and it didn't just crack my world, it obliterated it completely. I'd told Daniel I had an all-day brand strategy session with a potential client in Riverside, a suburb about 40 minutes away. It was a lie. Instead, I drove to the Harborview District, an upscale waterfront neighborhood I'd only driven through a handful of times, admiring the modern high-rises and trendy restaurants from my car window while thinking we could never afford to live there. Harborview Towers was exactly the kind of building I'd expected, all glass and steel and architectural ambition, with a doorman in the lobby and art installations in the common areas. The kind of place where monthly HOA fees probably exceeded our mortgage payment. I walked into the lobby trying to look like I belonged there, clutching a leather portfolio I'd brought as a prop. The doorman, a distinguished man in his 50s wearing a crisp uniform, smiled politely. "Good afternoon. Who are you here to visit?" I'd prepared for this moment. "I'm here to see Daniel Caldwell in Unit 47D. I'm his wife, Jennifer. He asked me to drop off some documents but forgot to leave me a key." The doorman's expression shifted subtly, not suspicion exactly, but careful professionalism. "I see. Unfortunately, I'll need to call up and get authorization before I can give you access, Mrs. Caldwell." "Of course," I said, my heart hammering. "Go ahead and call him." He picked up the desk phone, but I quickly added, "Actually, he's in meetings all day and asked me not to disturb him. Is there any way to verify my identity instead? I have my driver's license, and I can show you that we share the same last name." I pulled out my license and placed it on the desk. He examined it carefully, then typed something into his computer. His face showed recognition. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Mrs. Caldwell. We have strict security protocols. However, I do see that your name is listed on Mr. Caldwell's authorized visitor list, and we have a spare keycard for family emergencies." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a card in a small envelope. "Unit 47D, 4th floor. Elevators are just past the mailboxes." My name was on an authorized visitor list for an apartment I'd never known existed. The elevator ride felt endless. My reflection in the polished steel doors showed a woman who looked normal, professional outfit, neat hair, calm expression. But inside, I was disintegrating, breaking apart into questions that had no good answers. Unit 47D was at the end of a quiet hallway with only 2 doors, which meant the apartments were large. Expensive. I stood in front of the door for a full minute before I could make myself slide the keycard into the lock. The electronic beep and click of the lock opening was the sound of my marriage ending. The apartment was breathtaking, and that somehow made everything infinitely worse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the harbor, the afternoon sunlight dancing off the water and flooding the space with natural light that seemed almost cruel in its beauty. The interior was decorated in shades of charcoal gray and cream, all clean lines and expensive minimalism. A sectional sofa that probably cost more than my car faced an entertainment center with a television larger than anything we had at home. Everything was sleek, modern, sophisticated, the complete opposite of our warm, family-friendly craftsman house filled with Lily's artwork and family photos. This wasn't just a space Daniel occasionally used. This was a fully furnished, carefully designed residence where someone actually lived. The kitchen made my chest tighten with a mixture of recognition and betrayal. High-end stainless steel appliances, a wine refrigerator stocked with expensive bottles, and a coffee maker that looked like it belonged in a specialty cafe. On the counter sat a French press and a bag of Ethiopian beans from North Point Coffee Roasters, Daniel's favorite blend that he claimed was too expensive to buy regularly for our home. Apparently it wasn't too expensive for here. 2 coffee mugs sat in the sink. One was a simple black ceramic mug I'd never seen before. The other made my knees nearly buckle, a navy blue mug with "World's Best Dad" printed on the side in Lily's unmistakable 7-year-old handwriting. She'd made it last Father's Day at a pottery painting studio, so proud of her creation that she'd wrapped it in 6 layers of tissue paper. Seeing it here, in this secret apartment, felt like witnessing my daughter's innocence being weaponized. The refrigerator contained more evidence of regular occupancy: fresh produce, expensive cheeses, craft beer, meal prep containers with dates labeled in Daniel's precise handwriting. On the door hung a calendar, but instead of Lily's school events and soccer practices, it showed business appointments, gym sessions at a fitness club I'd never heard of, and notations like HD maintenance fee due, and storage unit payment. I moved through the apartment like a detective at a crime scene, photographing everything with shaking hands. The living room bookshelf held financial journals and business books, but also framed photographs that made my blood run cold. Daniel at what looked like a yacht club, wearing sailing attire I'd never seen him in. Daniel at a black tie charity gala I'd never attended with him. Daniel at an upscale restaurant, toasting with people I didn't recognize. There was no evidence of another woman, no romantic photos or feminine belongings. Whatever this apartment represented, it wasn't about an affair. It was about something else entirely, a whole separate existence Daniel had built without me. The home office was where I found the evidence that transformed confusion into comprehensive understanding of his betrayal. A dedicated workspace with dual monitors, a standing desk, and filing cabinets that held the roadmap to my husband's secret financial empire. I started with the most recent documents, working backward through time like an archaeologist excavating layers of deception. What I found was staggering in its complexity and chilling in its calculation. Daniel hadn't just hidden one bank account. He had 7 separate accounts across 4 different banks, each serving a specific purpose in his carefully constructed parallel financial life. The Westmont private banking account I discovered in his home office was just the operating account, the checking account for his secret life. But behind it was a structure so elaborate it must have taken years to build. Sterling Capital Group managed his primary investment portfolio, $1.8 million in diversified holdings including stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The quarterly statements showed consistent growth over the past 6 years. 6 years. He'd been building this fortune for most of our marriage. Pinnacle Crest Investments held another $620,000 in what appeared to be more aggressive growth stocks and cryptocurrency holdings. The statements showed he'd been investing in Bitcoin and Ethereum since 2019, riding the wave of returns that I'd only read about in news articles while thinking we couldn't afford to take such risks. Harborside Credit Union contained $280,000 in what looked like a cash reserve account, earning minimal interest but providing immediate liquidity. The transaction history showed regular withdrawals for rent, utilities, and daily expenses related to this apartment. But the most disturbing discovery was an offshore account at Cayman International Bank. The statements were sparse on details, but the balance was unmistakable, $2.4 million. $2.4 million sitting in an offshore account that existed for one primary purpose, hiding assets from taxation and legal discovery. I sat in his office chair, surrounded by evidence of systematic financial deception, trying to calculate the total. Over $5 million. Daniel had accumulated over $5 million in assets I knew nothing about. The paper trail told a story of breathtaking betrayal. I found documents showing that Daniel had been operating a side business as an independent financial consultant under the name Caldwell Capital Advisory for the past 7 years. While working full-time at Pinnacle Wealth Management, he'd been running a parallel consulting practice, taking on private clients who paid him directly for investment advice and wealth management services. The business registration documents showed he'd set up an LLC, obtained a separate tax identification number, and had been filing completely separate tax returns for this business entity. His client list included over 30 high-net-worth individuals who paid him consultation fees ranging from $5,000 to $25,000 per quarter. He'd been generating an additional $400,000 to $600,000 annually from this secret business, income I'd never known existed. But the illegal part, the part that made this not just betrayal but actual fraud, was that many of these private clients were people he'd met through his position at Pinnacle Wealth Management. The emails I found made it clear he was poaching clients from his employer, offering them more personalized service and better fee structures through his private practice, then pocketing the consultation fees without the firm's knowledge. He was violating his employment contract, his fiduciary duty to his employer, and probably several securities regulations. And he'd been doing it for years with such careful sophistication that no one had discovered it. The real estate documents revealed another layer of deception. Daniel didn't just rent this apartment, he owned it. The deed showed he'd purchased Unit 47D 3 years ago for $780,000, financing it with a mortgage I'd never known about, using income from his secret business to make the payments. The property had apparently appreciated to around $950,000 based on recent comparable sales in the building. But there was more. Daniel owned 2 other properties I'd never heard of, a small commercial space in the Riverside district that he rented out to a dental practice for $4,500 per month, and a vacation condo in Seaside Heights that generated short-term rental income through a property management company. The rental income from these properties added another $85,000 to his annual hidden revenue stream. I found lease agreements for a climate-controlled storage unit at Summit Storage Solutions. The monthly payment was $340 for a 10 by 20 unit, one of their largest. What could Daniel possibly be storing that required such a large space and that he needed to keep completely separate from our home? The business records for Caldwell Capital Advisory revealed an even darker truth. Daniel had been preparing for divorce. The formation documents were structured to ensure that in any legal separation, these business assets would be classified as his separate property, established and grown independently of our marriage. His attorneys, and yes, I found correspondence with not one but two different law firms, had advised him on strategies to minimize my claim to these assets in any future divorce proceedings. One email from 8 months ago was particularly chilling. Daniel, regarding your inquiry about asset protection in the event of marital dissolution, your current structure provides substantial protection. The offshore account is not discoverable through standard financial disclosure processes. The LLC is registered only in your name with no marital property contributions. The real estate holdings were purchased with separate business income and titled individually. However, I recommend documenting any marital waste by your spouse, excessive spending, poor financial decisions, or mismanagement of household resources. This creates justification for separate asset management and can influence equitable distribution arguments. Richard Pemberton, Pemberton and Associates Family Law. Marital waste. Daniel had been instructed to document my supposed financial irresponsibility to justify why he'd hidden millions of dollars from me. I scrolled through his files and found a folder labeled Household Documentation, filled with screenshots and notes about my business expenses, photos of purchases I'd made for Lily, records of grocery spending he'd characterized as excessive, and even criticism of the money I'd spent renovating our home, the home that was supposed to be our shared investment. Every time I'd bought Lily new school clothes, every client dinner I'd expensed to my business, every home improvement project I'd managed, Daniel had been documenting it as evidence of my financial incompetence. He'd been building a case against me while smiling at the dinner table and kissing me goodnight. I found bank records showing that Daniel had been systematically diverting money that should have gone into our joint accounts. His paychecks from Pinnacle Wealth Management were direct deposited to our shared checking account at Clearwater National Bank, but he'd been having his employer withhold extra amounts for additional tax withholding that actually went to his secret accounts. Over the past 3 years alone, he'd diverted approximately $78,000 that I believed was going to the IRS. The tax returns I found in his files revealed the full scope of his fraud. Daniel had been filing married filings separately for the past 4 years, something I'd never known about or consented to. I'd been signing what I thought were joint tax returns, but the documents I'd actually signed were just my individual returns. He'd forged my signature on the married filing separately elections and had been structuring his deductions to minimize his reported income on our shared return while reporting the full amount on his separate filing to the IRS. This wasn't just marital deception. This was tax fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation on a massive scale. But perhaps the most painful discovery was a handwritten journal I found in his desk drawer. It contained Daniel's private thoughts about our marriage, his plans for the future, and his justifications for everything he'd been doing. The entries went back 5 years and painted a picture of a man who'd fallen out of love with his family but was too calculating to leave without protecting his assets first. He wrote about feeling trapped by domestic mediocrity and exhausted by the performance of suburban family life. He described me as financially unsophisticated and Lily as an obligation that limits my potential. One entry from 2 years ago read, "Jennifer suspects nothing. Her naive trust in our partnership makes this easier, though sometimes I feel something like guilt. But I've worked too hard to build this wealth to see it divided in a divorce settlement. Better to be patient, establish everything properly, then exit on my terms when the time is right." Exit on his terms. Daniel had been planning to abandon us for years, carefully constructing a financial fortress that would leave Lily and me with as little as possible while he walked away with millions. I photographed every document, every statement, every incriminating email. My phone's storage was nearly full by the time I finished, but I had comprehensive evidence of everything Daniel had been hiding. As I prepared to leave the apartment, I noticed a business card tucked into a frame on his desk. Gerald Martinez, Senior Wealth Manager at Sterling Capital Group, with a handwritten note. Daniel, looking forward to our quarterly review next Tuesday. Your portfolio performance continues to exceed projections. Next Tuesday. That was 6 days from now. Which meant I had less than a week to decide how to confront Daniel about all of this. But I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone whose authority Daniel couldn't dismiss, whose presence would prevent him from lying or manipulating his way out of this confrontation. I needed someone who taught Daniel about integrity and responsibility, someone whose disappointment would cut deeper than any legal threat I could make. I needed his mother, Patricia Caldwell. Patricia Caldwell lived in an elegant Tudor-style home in Oak Ridge Heights, about 20 minutes from our house. At 68 years old, she remained sharp, dignified, and fiercely principled. A retired corporate attorney who'd spent 40 years practicing contract law at one of the city's most prestigious firms, Patricia had built her reputation on meticulous attention to detail and an unwavering commitment to ethical practice. She'd raised Daniel as a single mother after his father died in a construction accident when Daniel was just 12, instilling in him values of honesty, hard work, and financial responsibility. Or so she thought. I'd always had a complicated relationship with Patricia. She was never warm exactly, but she was fair and respectful. She adored Lily with a grandmother's genuine affection, though she showed it through educational gifts and museum trips rather than baking cookies or playing dress-up. When I'd started my marketing agency, Patricia had been one of my first clients, hiring me to rebrand her consulting practice before she retired. She respected competence and rewarded capability. I knew she'd raised Daniel to value those same qualities. Which was why discovering that her son had become a fraud and a thief would devastate her completely. I called her from my car in the Harborview Towers parking garage, my hands still shaking from what I'd discovered upstairs. Patricia, it's Jennifer. I need to speak with you about something urgent. Something about Daniel. Can I come over right now? There was a pause, and when she spoke, her voice carried the careful concern of someone who'd spent decades evaluating potential crises. Jennifer, you sound distressed. Is Daniel hurt? Is Lily all right? They're both fine physically, I said, choosing my words carefully. But I've discovered something about Daniel that you need to see. Something serious. I have documentation with me. Come now, she said without hesitation. I'll put coffee on. Patricia's home office was exactly what I'd expected, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal volumes, a massive mahogany desk that had belonged to her father, and framed diplomas and bar certifications covering one wall. She sat across from me in a leather chair, reading glasses perched on her nose, as I walked her through everything I'd discovered over the past week. I started with the bank statement I'd found in Daniel's filing cabinet, then showed her the photographs of the secret apartment, the business records for Caldwell Capital Advisory, the offshore accounts, the real estate holdings, and finally, the emails with his attorneys about asset protection strategies. Patricia examined each piece of evidence with the methodical attention she'd once given to complex contract disputes. Her face remained composed, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped the pages slightly too tightly, the occasional pause where she'd close her eyes briefly before continuing to the next document. When I showed her the tax returns revealing that Daniel had been filing separately without my knowledge or consent, her composure finally cracked. That's identity fraud, she said quietly. He forged your signature on federal tax documents. That's a felony. I know, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Patricia, there's over $5 million in hidden assets. He's been running an illegal consulting business, poaching clients from his employer, hiding income offshore, and planning to divorce me while keeping everything for himself. She set down the documents and removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose in a gesture I'd seen Daniel make 1,000 times. For a long moment, she said nothing, and I could see her processing not just the legal implications but the personal betrayal. This was her son, the boy she'd raised alone, the man she'd believed embodied the values she'd worked so hard to instill. How long? She finally asked. How long has he been planning this? I showed her the journal entries, watching her face pale as she read Daniel's private thoughts about our family, about me, about Lily. When she reached the entry where he'd called his own daughter, an obligation that limits my potential, I saw tears form in her eyes for the first time since I'd known her. "I didn't raise him to be this," she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "His father and I taught him that family was sacred, that honesty was non-negotiable, that wealth without integrity was worthless." She looked up at me, and I saw not just sadness but fury in her eyes. "This is systematic fraud, Jennifer. Against you, against his employer, against the IRS, and against every principle I tried to teach him. I need your help," I said. "I need to confront him, but I can't do it alone. He'll lie, he'll manipulate, he'll try to minimize or explain everything away. But if you're there, he can't lie to both of us," Patricia finished. "And he can't dismiss my understanding of exactly what he's done." She stood up, her posture straightening into what I recognized as her courtroom bearing. "When?" "His calendar shows a meeting next Tuesday at 2 p.m. at the apartment with his wealth manager from Sterling Capital Group. They're doing a quarterly portfolio review. If we arrive during that meeting, he'll be caught with his financial advisor, surrounded by evidence, unable to deny anything." Patricia nodded slowly. "A wealth manager will serve as a neutral witness to his reaction and his admissions." "Smart." She looked at me with something approaching respect. "You've documented everything thoroughly, Jennifer. The photographs, the financial records, the correspondence. This is admissible evidence that would hold up in any legal proceeding." "I learned from the best," I said, gesturing around her office filled with decades of legal practice. "You always told me that documentation was everything." Over the next few days, Patricia and I prepared our strategy with the precision of trial attorneys building a case. She reviewed every piece of evidence I'd gathered, helping me organize it chronologically and by category: financial fraud, tax evasion, employment contract violations, marital deception. She contacted a colleague who specialized in financial crimes and had them review the offshore account structures to confirm what we already knew: Daniel had crossed from moral failure into criminal activity. She also reached out discreetly to her network at Pinnacle Wealth Management. Patricia knew several board members from her years practicing corporate law, and through those connections, she confirmed that Daniel's side consulting business violated multiple terms of his employment agreement. If the firm discovered what he'd been doing, immediate termination would be the minimum consequence. Criminal charges for client theft and breach of fiduciary duty were likely. "He's been living on borrowed time," Patricia said during one of our planning sessions at her house. "Eventually, someone would have discovered the consulting business, or the IRS would have flagged the offshore accounts, or a client would have mentioned his services to someone at Pinnacle. His entire house of cards was always going to collapse." "You've just accelerated the timeline." "I'd told Daniel I was taking Lily to visit my sister Rachel in Millbrook for a long weekend. In reality, Lily was staying with my best friend Monica, who'd been horrified when I'd told her everything but had immediately agreed to help however she could. Daniel seemed almost relieved to have the house to himself, which made sense now that I understood he'd been living a double life. Our family being gone meant he could fully inhabit his other existence without the burden of pretending." On Tuesday afternoon, Patricia and I sat in my car in the Harborview Towers parking garage, watching the minutes tick toward 2 p.m. Patricia had dressed in one of her courtroom suits, charcoal gray with a crisp white blouse, and carried herself with the authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding respect in difficult situations. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, turning to look at me directly. "Once we walk through that door, there's no going back. Daniel's life as he knows it ends today. His career, his reputation, his carefully constructed plans, all of it collapses. Are you prepared for the fallout?" I thought about Lily, about the daughter who still believed her father was a hero, about the college fund Daniel had been planning to keep for himself, about the years of lies and manipulation. "He made his choices," I said. "Now he gets to face the consequences." We rode the elevator to the 4th floor in silence. The hallway was quiet, the thick carpeting absorbing the sound of our footsteps as we approached Unit 47D. Through the door, I could hear voices, Daniel's familiar tone and another man's deeper voice discussing investment performance and portfolio rebalancing. I slid the keycard into the lock. The electronic beep seemed impossibly loud. The apartment was arranged exactly as I'd expected for a business meeting. Daniel sat at the dining table with a man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit, documents and a laptop spread between them. They were both holding coffee cups, relaxed and professional, reviewing charts that showed upward trending investment growth. Daniel saw me first. His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and then complete panic when his eyes landed on his mother standing beside me. "Jennifer," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Millbrook with Lily and Rachel." "Yes, that's what I told you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The same way you told me you were at the office today having back-to-back client meetings, not reviewing your secret multi-million-dollar investment portfolio in your secret apartment." The wealth manager, Gerald Martinez, based on the nameplate visible on his open laptop, looked between us with growing discomfort. He started gathering his papers. "Perhaps I should reschedule this meeting." "No," Patricia said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "You should stay, Mr. Martinez. You're about to witness something important." Daniel had gone completely pale. He looked at his mother with something approaching terror. "Mom, what are you doing here? This isn't what it looks like." "Don't," Patricia cut him off, her voice like ice. "Don't insult my intelligence or your wife's by pretending this is anything other than what it clearly is. We've seen everything, Daniel. The offshore accounts, the illegal consulting business, the forged tax documents, the real estate holdings, the asset protection strategies. All of it." I placed my phone on the dining table and pulled up the photographs I'd taken during my first visit to the apartment. "We have documentation of everything. Bank statements, business records, emails with your attorneys about hiding assets from me, journal entries where you describe your family as an obligation you're planning to escape from." Gerald Martinez was now frozen in his chair, clearly understanding that he was witnessing something far more serious than a marital dispute. His eyes had widened at the phrase, offshore accounts, and forged tax documents. Daniel tried to recover, shifting to the charming persona that usually got him out of difficult situations. "Jennifer, sweetheart, let me explain. This is all more complicated than it looks. I've been trying to build financial security for our family." "By stealing from your employer?" Patricia's voice cut through his explanation like a blade. "By committing tax fraud? By hiding millions of dollars while telling your wife you can't afford a family vacation? That's your definition of building security?" She walked over to stand directly in front of her son, and I saw Daniel shrink back slightly in his chair. "I raised you better than this. Your father died building a better life for us, working honestly, paying his taxes, treating people with respect. And you've dishonored everything he stood for." "Mr. Martinez," I said, turning to the clearly uncomfortable wealth manager. "How long have you been managing Daniel's portfolio at Sterling Capital Group?" Gerald cleared his throat. "About 6 years. But I should clarify that I'm not comfortable discussing client information in this context." "Were you aware that Daniel is married?" Patricia asked. "That he has a 7-year-old daughter? That his wife knows nothing about these accounts or the offshore holdings you've been helping him structure?" Gerald's silence was answer enough. He'd known. He'd helped Daniel set up accounts specifically designed to hide assets from a spouse. "Were you aware that Daniel has been running an unauthorized consulting business while employed at Pinnacle Wealth Management?" I continued. "That many of his private clients are people he met through his position at the firm? That he's been violating his employment contract and fiduciary duties for years?" Gerald's face had gone from uncomfortable to alarmed. "I was not aware of any employment agreement violations." Mr. Caldwell presented himself as an independent consultant operating within appropriate legal boundaries. "He lied to you too," Patricia said. "My son has been lying to everyone, his employer, his wife, his financial advisors, the IRS. He's built an empire on deception, and it ends today." Daniel finally seemed to realize that his usual tactics weren't going to work. He looked between his mother and me, his expression shifting to something uglier, defensive anger replacing panic. "You went through my private files? You invaded my personal space? That's illegal. Actually, Patricia said coldly, as your wife, Jennifer has every legal right to access marital property and financial records. What's illegal is forging her signature on tax documents, hiding marital assets, and committing employment fraud. Would you like me to enumerate the specific statutes you've violated? Because I've been practicing law longer than you've been alive, and I can tell you exactly how much prison time each offense carries. The word prison hung in the air like smoke. Gerald Martinez stood up abruptly. I think I need to leave. Daniel, we'll need to reschedule, and I'll need to speak with our legal department about some of the information that's been disclosed today. Before you go, I said, you should know that we're filing for divorce, and all of these accounts will be subject to legal discovery. I'd recommend you preserve all records because they'll be subpoenaed. Gerald nodded curtly, gathered his belongings with shaking hands, and practically fled the apartment. The door closing behind him seemed to seal Daniel's fate. Now it was just the three of us, the wife he'd betrayed, the mother he'd disappointed, and the man who'd built his secret empire on lies. Patricia sat down across from Daniel, her posture rigid with controlled fury. You have 30 days to liquidate this apartment and transfer every penny of your hidden assets into accounts accessible to Jennifer. You will resign from Pinnacle Wealth Management before they discover your violations and file charges. You will sign whatever divorce papers Jennifer presents without contest. And you will accept whatever custody arrangement she deems appropriate for Lily. Mom, you can't be serious. I'm absolutely serious, Patricia said. Because the alternative is that I personally deliver all of this evidence to the district attorney, to the IRS, to your employer, and to the State Bar Association. Do you understand what happens then? Criminal charges for tax fraud and identity theft. Civil penalties that could exceed everything you've hidden. Complete destruction of your professional reputation. And you'll do it all while your daughter watches her father be arrested and prosecuted. Daniel's face had gone from angry to desperate. You wouldn't do that. I'm your son. And Lily is my granddaughter, Patricia said, her voice breaking slightly. That little girl who adores you, who thinks you're a hero, who doesn't deserve to learn that her father is a criminal who was planning to abandon her. You've forgotten what it means to be a father, Daniel. You've forgotten what it means to be a man of integrity. But I haven't forgotten, and I won't let you destroy Lily's childhood to protect your fraud. I watched my husband, the man I'd loved for 11 years, built a life with, created a child with, finally understand that he'd lost everything. Not just his marriage or his mother's respect, but the carefully constructed future he'd been planning, the financial empire he'd built in shadows, the escape route he'd been preparing for years. You have a choice, I said quietly. Cooperate fully, accept responsibility, and maybe, we can keep this from becoming a criminal matter. Or fight us, and Patricia will make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done. Your employer, your clients, the authorities. Everything comes out. Daniel sat in silence, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, finally understanding that some lies are too big to maintain once exposed, and some betrayals destroy not just relationships but the very foundation of who you thought you were. His empire of deception had taken years to build. It had taken less than an hour to completely dismantle. Those words had stayed with me, becoming a kind of moral compass as I rebuilt my life from the wreckage of Daniel's deception. My business, Cascade Communications, had flourished in unexpected ways. The stress and chaos of the divorce had initially devastated my focus and creativity, but eventually became a source of strength and authenticity that clients responded to powerfully. I'd pivoted the agency's focus toward helping other women entrepreneurs rebuild their brands after major life transitions, divorce, career changes, business failures, health crises. There was something profoundly healing about helping other people redesign their professional identities after their worlds had been shattered. Every website redesign, every brand refresh, every complete business overhaul represented someone's journey toward a new version of themselves. My own experience gave me insights and empathy that my competitors couldn't match. Within 6 months of the divorce, I'd landed 3 major clients specifically because they wanted someone who understood rebuilding from ground zero. The agency had grown from 12 employees to 18, and our annual revenue had increased by 40%. I'd been featured in a regional business magazine article about entrepreneurs who turned personal adversity into professional innovation. The irony wasn't lost on me that Daniel's betrayal had ultimately made me more successful than I'd been during our marriage. I'd also discovered an unexpected passion for financial education. Working with a nonprofit organization called Women's Financial Empowerment Network, I'd started teaching workshops on financial literacy, asset protection, and recognizing signs of economic abuse. Standing in front of rooms full of women, sharing my story and teaching them how to protect themselves from what had happened to me, felt like transforming my trauma into something useful. The most surprising development had been my friendship with Gerald Martinez, Daniel's former wealth manager from Sterling Capital Group. 3 months after the confrontation, Gerald had reached out through Patricia, asking if he could meet with me to apologize and explain his role in the situation. We'd met at a quiet coffee shop, and Gerald had been genuinely remorseful. He explained that Daniel had presented himself as a legitimate independent consultant, had provided documentation that appeared to show proper business registration and tax compliance, and had never mentioned being married or having a family. Gerald specialized in working with entrepreneurs and high-net-worth individuals who wanted privacy in their financial affairs, and Daniel had exploited that professional discretion. I should have asked more questions, Gerald had said, his guilt obvious. I should have insisted on meeting family members before helping structure offshore accounts. I followed the letter of my professional obligations, but I violated the spirit of them. I helped a man hide assets from his wife, even if I didn't know that's what I was doing. That conversation had led to Gerald becoming one of my most valuable resources in the financial literacy workshops. He now volunteered his time teaching women how to audit their family finances, what questions to ask their spouses about accounts and investments, and what red flags to watch for. He'd turned his own failure into a teaching opportunity, and together we'd helped dozens of women protect themselves from financial deception. The old house on Maplewood Court had sold for $680,000, and I'd used part of the proceeds to establish an irrevocable college trust fund for Lily that Daniel could never touch, no matter what happened. The rest went toward purchasing our townhouse outright, creating an emergency fund that made me feel secure for the first time in my adult life, and investing in growing my business. I'd kept almost nothing from our old life together. The furniture held too many memories of performance and deception. I donated most of it and started fresh with pieces I chose myself, comfortable, practical, honest. Lily's room in the townhouse was smaller than her old bedroom, but we decorated it together, letting her choose colors and themes that reflected who she was becoming rather than who we'd wanted her to be for photographs. The only things I'd kept were Lily's artwork, the family photos from before I'd discovered the truth, and the koi pond fountain that Daniel had commissioned for our 5th anniversary. Patricia had helped me install it in a corner of our small townhouse patio, saying that beautiful things shouldn't be abandoned just because they came from painful places. Lily loved sitting by it while doing homework, the sound of water providing a peaceful backdrop to her studying. Standing in my sunny kitchen on this particular morning, I realized I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine contentment. Not the performed happiness I'd maintained during the last years of my marriage, but real peace with my actual life. My business was thriving, my daughter was slowly healing, my home was modest but entirely mine, and the relationships in my life were based on honesty rather than illusion. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia, Sunday dinner at 5 o'clock. I'm making that lasagna Lily loves, and I found a new puzzle we can work on together. Should I pick up ice cream? I smiled as I typed back, we'll be there. Should I bring salad? Perfect. See you both then. Family dinner is better when it's honest. That afternoon, I took Lily to her soccer game at the community fields near our townhouse. She played midfielder now, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, her face focused and determined as she chased the ball across the field. I stood on the sidelines with the other parents, cheering and taking photos, and I realized that nobody here knew our story. To them, I was just another single mom supporting her kids' activities. There was something liberating about that anonymity, about being able to define myself by who I was now rather than what had been done to me. I'd spent so many years in Cedarbrook being known as half of Daniel and Jennifer, the successful couple everyone admired. Now I was just Jennifer, business owner, soccer mom, volunteer financial literacy instructor, Patricia's friend, Lily's protector. After the game, Lily ran over to me, sweaty and grinning, her team having won 3-2. "Did you see my assist in the second half?" she asked, bouncing with excitement. "I saw everything," I told her, wrapping her in a hug despite her protests that she was gross and sweaty. "You were amazing." As we walked back to the car, Lily's hand in mine, she asked the question she'd been asking more frequently lately. "Mom, do you think Daddy will ever be like he used to be?" It was the hardest question to answer because the truth was complicated. The daddy she remembered had never really existed, he'd been a performance, a carefully maintained illusion. But she was 8 years old and didn't need that level of philosophical complexity. "I think Daddy is trying to figure out who he wants to be," I said carefully. "And while he does that, you and me and Grandma Patricia are going to keep being a family that's honest and takes care of each other. Is that okay?" She thought about this for a moment, then nodded. "I like living with you. And I like Grandma Patricia. And I really like Sonny." "I like all those things too," I said. That evening at Patricia's house, over lasagna and garlic bread and the complicated 1,000-piece puzzle that would take us weeks to complete, I watched Lily laugh at one of Patricia's stories about her courtroom days, and I felt gratitude for something I'd never expected, thankfulness for Daniel's betrayal. Because without it, I might have spent the rest of my life in a marriage that looked successful but felt empty, never knowing I was capable of so much more strength and happiness than I'd imagined. I would have continued performing perfection while drowning in quiet desperation, teaching Lily through my example that women should tolerate deception to maintain comfortable illusions. Instead, his systematic fraud had forced me to discover who I really was underneath all the roles I'd been playing. Wife, mother, business owner, perfect family woman, I'd shed those performances and found something more authentic underneath. I was still a mother, but one who chose fierce protection over comfortable denial. Still a business owner, but one who used her platform to help other women find their strength. Still part of a family, but one built on truth rather than image management. Some days I even felt grateful for Daniel's deception because without it I might have spent my entire life in that beautiful prison of suburban perfection, never realizing I was strong enough to escape and build something real. The truth, as devastating as it had been to discover, had genuinely set me free. And the life I'd built from the ashes of Daniel's betrayal was smaller in some ways, quieter, less impressive to casual observers, but it was mine. Earned with courage and honesty, built on a foundation that couldn't be shaken by hidden accounts or forged signatures or secret apartments. Lily and I were going to be more than fine. We were going to be genuinely happy, living lives we didn't have to hide or perform or apologize for. And that was worth more than any amount of money Daniel had tried to steal. As we left Patricia's house that evening, Lily sleepy against my shoulder and Patricia waving from her doorway, I thought about the woman I'd been 14 months ago, confused, betrayed, terrified of what the future held. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her that she was stronger than she knew, that the pain would transform into power, and that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for becoming who you were always meant to be. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going. And don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story will absolutely blow your mind. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.